For analysis, let's bring in Einar Tangen. He is a senior fellow at the Taihe Institute and the chairman of the Asian Narratives. Welcome. Let's start with President Xi's comments, saying, of course, that the collective rise of the global south is a distinctive feature of the great transformation across the world. What type of transformation are we witnessing? Because BRICS used to just stand for the initials of the 5 original nations. As we just found out in this story, and we've watched, BRICS Plus, we're looking at the family photo, it's growing and growing. That's a transformation as well. Describe what we're witnessing.
Well, you're witnessing the most dynamic grouping that the world has, and very positive. It's all about trade and development. There's no politics involved. It's not about anything else, although there was a lot of notice taken of the conflicts out there and a desire to see them end peacefully. But that is in line with the development agenda. So right now, it is truly global. You start looking at the partners that they added on top of the original BRICS members and the plus members that were added. There were 5 added earlier. It really is quite something, and with 30 more looking to do it, the question is, how do you handle it? It's not, they don't have a permanent secretariat, and the question is, how do you do it? But Xi Jinping wanted to pull it all together and make sure that it's understood that this is not political, it's not military, it is purely about development.
Yeah, talk to us about the appeal and what this says about the old alliances and the need for a new one.
Well, the post-World War II order was premised that America and Europe would basically, usher in a period of peace, and they would guard the world from all the terrible things that could happen. And you can see that reflected in the Security Council in terms of the 5 members and things like that. It's overweight in terms of 15% of the population underweight in terms of the rest. And it just, right now, things have changed. Dynamics are that the nations who were once under colonial rule are now finding their own voices. You see that with South Africa, taking a very hard stance on what's going on in Gaza, things like this. So economically, these are countries that need to develop. They have to find a way of doing it. This idea of waiting for the post-World War II order to do something, I think those days are over. I think they want to do it themselves.
And what are the key highlights from this particular summit, would you say?
Well, first off, they had a 134-point joint communique, and it really is, very, very comprehensive in terms of expressing exactly what this grouping is about. But what was missing was, putting dollars to it, and also how this organization is going to organize with so many new members. New members are great; it's representative. But how quickly can you go if you create another version of a global South UN, and that probably won't work. But what was really interesting to see, very, very positive, was just before the meeting, China and India came to an understanding about a long 4-year-old border dispute. Now, I shouldn't say 4-year, it's actually many, many years, going back to the 50s. But there had been tensions, and those were resolved. And the issue here is, although that's political, you have this idea that rather than starting wars, this new grouping is about consensus and about diplomacy. It is not about confrontation and seeing differences as challenges. It's really seeing differences as something you have to understand and accept.
You mentioned the UN, and maybe you can talk a little bit about the disconnect, because you pick up a Western newspaper, you might find a short little article about BRICS on page 26 or whatever, and yet the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres went. I mean, it seems like there's a disconnect in how BRICS is viewed.
Well, exactly. I mean, right now, Washington is not happy. They weren't too happy about India settling its differences on the border, or at least beginning to, with China. Obviously, it isn't too happy about Bangladesh and what they perceive as interference in their election. But there's this growing sense that the West doesn't really care. This was a huge event. I mean, you have how many countries are jumping to join in, and basically, the United States wants to ignore that, and I think that's not the way. I think it'd be better if they engaged. They said, look, if this is only going to be about economics and development, why shouldn't we get together? We can put aside the military and political stuff that we have and start concentrating on how we can get along, because that's what this is. Now, remember, this is not like the United Nations. There's no veto power. There is no, majority rules. This is a group that can only go forward based on consensus and cooperation, and you saw that. I mean, these groups were not afraid to tell, Russia it's time for peace, and Russia responded positively, not defensively, saying yes, I agree, our door is open, let's begin. That's very different kind of atmosphere than what we have at the UN, where you have vote after vote on Gaza that's being ignored by the parties that are involved.
Einar, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your insights. Appreciate it.